Okay, audio nerds, welcome back to the channel, and it's time today to look at another shiny new bit of kit. And here we have the new version 2 of iFi's very popular desktop DAC and amp combo, the Zen DAC. But does the Zen DAC V2 bring the same levels of sonic refinement to the sub £200 DAC and amp market? Let's take a look. Hello everyone, and thanks for joining me again and for all the great comments on the channel. If you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing it now by hitting the little red button under the video. And if you want more behind the scenes pictures and chat, please do join the Discord server, the link's in the description. Now you might have caught the video I did recently on the iFi Hip DAC, which is iFi's stylish little portable amp. And the Zen DAC is pretty much the desktop version of the Hip DAC, but the key thing is that it remains relatively affordable at around £160 here in the UK. Now for the sake of transparency, this Zen DAC V2 was sent to me on loan from iFi. Shout out to Ricardo at iFi, but they're absolutely not paying me to do this review, and they've had absolutely no editorial input into the review whatsoever. They're seeing it at the same time as you are. Now I must admit that I haven't had any experience of using the original Zen DAC, but I'm told that this version 2 is very similar in terms of look and feel, although it has had some significant internal upgrades, which we'll get to in a minute. So let's start with the design, and as with all iFi kit, this thing looks and feels solidly built. Now it weighs around 800 grams, so it feels really sturdy, and due to the nice rubber feet at the bottom, it won't slide around on your desk. However, at the same time as being sturdy, it's also quite transportable. Definitely not portable, but transportable. This is definitely not one to take with you in your backpack to the coffee shop, though. You'll need the Hip DAC for that. The slightly quirky shape of the thing gives it some character, which is often lacking, let's face it, in hi-fi equipment. Now up front we've got this lovely big and tactile volume pot, which has got a nice smooth action, no clicks here. And on the left we've got the power match button, which is basically a high or low gain switch. And then we've got the juicy true bass button, which we'll talk about in a minute. On the right here we have two helpfully labelled headphone outputs. So we've got the 6.3mm single-ended headphone output, and then we've got the balanced 4.4 Pentacon output as well. Let's turn this thing round, and round the back we have a USB input only. Now it's not a standard USB connector, it's got this kind of extra nubbin on it at the top, if you can see that, which presumably supplies the power as well. Now that's the only input we've got in terms of getting signal into the Zen DAC. There's no SPDIF input, there's no coax, it's just USB digital, which is fine by me. And you can see there's also a power jack for an external 5-volt power supply. Sadly you don't get that one in the box. You can buy one from iFi for I think it's around £40 separately if you so wish. Of course, iFi say that you'll get a cleaner and more reliable power supply if you use an external power brick. However, personally, having used the Zen DAC V2 with various sources, including my Mac Mini over there, my MacBook Pro, my iPad, and even my little Raspberry Pi streamer, I never had an issue with the power cutting out, and I had more than enough power to drive both the line level output and my headphones, including the Sundaras. So I personally haven't felt the need to add an external power supply. So apart from that, we have a pair of RCA outputs, and you've also got a balanced output. It's again a Pentacon output at the back. Then you've got this little switch which either makes it a variable output, which can be controlled with the pot, or a fixed line level output, and I've just left mine on fixed actually. Now the good news is that this switch doesn't affect the output from the headphone jacks at the front. So if you say, for example, have this thing hooked up to your hi-fi system, but then you plug headphones in, don't worry, your brain's not going to be blown out by a line level signal into your sensitive headphones. You can still control that through the volume pot. So let's get on to the internal specs, which are rather helpfully all listed, oops, upside down, on the back of the box. So this thing is of course both a DAC, digital analog converter, and an amp. So it allows you to take the digital signal from your source and convert it into an analog signal, which is then amplified to a headphone or line level output. In the case of the Zen V2, the DAC duties are performed by a pair of Burr-Brown DAC chips, and these Burr-Brown chips are favoured by iFi in many of their products, and these chips are uncommon amongst a sea of lower end DACs which tend to support ESS or AK DACs. iFi have also equipped the Zen V2 with a new processor. It's a 16-core XMOS chip as opposed to the X-core version on the Zen V1, and that gives the V2 more processing power. It allows it to be a full MQA decoder rather than just a renderer, for what it's worth if you're an MQA fan. There's also apparently a low jitter clock, and iFi claims that that produces much better sonic performance to the tune of around 20 decibels. In terms of power output, the V2 puts out a standard 2 volts RCA line level output, doubled if you use the Pentacon balanced output on the back. On the front, the single-ended headphone output is 280 milliwatts at 32 ohms, and the balanced output, the 4.4, gives you 380 milliwatts at 50 ohms, so plenty of power for even the most demanding over-ear headphones. So apart from the full MQA decoder functionality, the Zen DAC V2 also supports all the usual audiophile file formats, i.e. high-resolution music up to 384 kilobits per second sample rate in PCM wave format, and also it fully supports DSD 256 and DXD. So let's get on to the more important stuff, like how does this thing work and how does it sound. First of all, if you're using it with a Mac or an iPad, for example, you don't need any extra software, but if you are using Windows, you'll need to download a driver to get the full MQA decoder experience if that's important to you. Hooking it up is fairly easy, and as you can see here, I've just connected it to my iPad with the cable supplied and a USB-C to USB-A adapter. Once it's connected, it powers on immediately, and the LED light behind the volume pot indicates the type of file and sample rate that you are playing. Now there's a nice little instruction pamphlet that comes with the Zen DAC which lets you decode those various colors. In terms of headphones, I've been listening to these predominantly with my absolute favorites, as you'll know, the Hi-Fi-Man Sundaras, which are an open-backed planar magnetic headphone. Not the most sensitive, they take a bit of driving, which is why I thought they'd be a good match for the Zen. I've also been using my HD 650s from Sennheiser, and also for a laugh my Grado SR225s, which are very treble forward bright sounding headphones. I'm playing predominantly using the Roon software, which I've got running on my iPad here. Look out for a video on Roon coming up soon if you don't know what that is. I did also use the Tidal app to play MQA directly, although you can do it through Roon as well. It's got a Tidal integration. So let's talk about the sound. Now, straight out of the gate, I think the defining characteristics of the Zen V2 are its clarity, a solid rhythmic drive, and a real sense of space in the music. Now, I was expecting a very warm sound signature after having listened to the Hip DAC, but actually this thing is less coloured, more neutral. Let's talk about the bass first. Yes, we've got to talk about the bass because it's so good. The bass reproduction is absolutely fantastic, even with the true bass boost off. You get really good definition and body across the entire bass range, and it never threatens to swamp the low mids. So for example, if you fire up Angel by Massive Attack from their 1998 album Mezzanine, now the intro to that track is a real test of how well a system controls bass, and you'll find that the Zen V2 presents it in all its tight, menacing glory without it becoming a sludgy mess. Similarly, the deep bass found in Burial's 2007 masterpiece Untrue is rendered with an authentic sense of weight, which nicely counterbalances the rattling percussion and sampled vocals at the other end of the mix. Mark my words, if you enjoy your electronic music, the iFi is a very, very good choice. That's not to say that the Zen doesn't have other sonic qualities. So the mids, for example, are presented really beautifully there's great clear separation between the instruments and vocals. The HD 650 headphones, which are just behind me, they're known for their incredible mid-range reproduction, and they sing beautifully through the Zen V2. For example, if you play Secret Smile by Semisonic, this is an example of how the gentle acoustic guitar line doesn't get lost in the rest of the mix, and it retains its distinct identity. Switch something a little bit rowdier like Franz Ferdinand's debut 2004 album, and the jagged guitars sound visceral but not painful. The Zen DAC does a really good job of rounding off their sharper edges. Another good track is Tarot by Alt J off their album An Awesome Wave. Now this has got a lot of different elements coming into the mids, and you'll hear how well the Zen V2 articulates all those elements. It gives them space, it stages and images them beautifully, and it all sounds incredibly cohesive and convincing. So mids superb. I would say that the treble is perhaps the most coloured stroke altered aspect of the presentation of the Zen V2. Now it's far from being rolled off, but it's definitely on the smoother side, so I don't think this is the most analytical or resolving DAC and amp in the higher frequencies. Instead, I would say the treble sounds really smooth and musical, which is particularly good for brighter headphones or more poorly recorded tracks, which may be slightly jarring through a brighter amp. I did listen to quite a few MQA tracks. Here we've got the new 21 Pilots album, and certainly the lights on the Zen DAC went the correct colour. Here we are, it's gone blue, which indicates a studio authenticated track. Now lots of people, me included, are highly skeptical of MQA's claims and are concerned that it continues to be a proprietary closed source licensed format. But to be honest with you, it sounds pretty decent through the Sundaras. I couldn't really distinguish the difference between the MQA tracks and CD quality files. Once the volume had been accounted for, you often get a little bit of a volume boost with MQA tracks. Not sure whether that's innocent or not. But if you are an MQA devotee, then rest assured the Zen V2 will suit your needs with its full decoding goodness. You just have to remember to set it up as a full decoder in the software, whatever you're using. But let's for a minute move away from the dry audiophile technicalities. Let's just say this thing sounds wonderful. Now I listened to the whole of The Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd, totally lost in the mix. I didn't mean to, it just kind of happened because there's absolutely no harshness. It's not fatiguing, even when Claire Torrey is wailing away on Great Gig in the Sky, a track which can easily induce a headache when played through a harsher, less rounded amp. In combination with the super comfortable cans, which the Sundaras are, or the 650s for that matter, I could literally listen to the sound coming out of this thing for hours. Yes, it sounds even better than the hip DAC. There's more clarity, more definition in the mids and treble, and even the bass is more controlled. As with the hip DAC, all you need to do is flick the true bass switch if you're in need of a bassgasm, and once again it adds a beautiful, organic, while still tasteful layer of extra bass to the mix. And I find, like I said with the hip DAC, that it works best if you're listening to classical music or jazz. Those are the kind of genre which, in my opinion, are often a little bit lean in the bass department. Bassy electronic music or modern pop, I find the true bass a little bit overpowering. I'm just not that much of a bass head. Maybe you are, in which case you'll absolutely love the true bass on all the time. Now I'll just come on to the one major criticism I have of this thing, which is exactly the same criticism I had with the hip DAC, and that is, if you like listening at low volumes, there definitely is channel imbalance between the left and right channels. One will sound louder than the other. Now once your volume is more than about that far along, the sound evens out, but the problem is if you're listening through IEMs, by the time you've turned the volume knob that far, it's too loud for comfortable listening. So I would say that you either need to add a resistor, like the one that iFi sells themselves, or restrict yourself to using headphones rather than IEMs. I would argue that IEMs really don't need a dedicated desktop amp to sound their best. But to be honest with you, that's the only major downside I could find with the Zen DAC, and for £160, I think this is probably one of the best bits of hi-fi gear you're going to find. If you are after a much more analytical and possibly a brighter, more treble forward sound, you might want to go for one of the Topping or SMSL products, or even the Dragonfly Red, which is roughly the same price and is obviously much more portable. But remember, that just has one output option, no analog volume control like this has. So I think the Zen V2 is so much better value than the Dragonfly in that regard. I also vastly prefer the sound from the Zen to this, the FIO BTR5. Obviously this is a fantastic nifty little device, and I've reviewed it in another video, and it's great to have for out and about listening, and it's perfect for IEMs. However, if you're using full-sized cans, the Zen V2 has a much fuller, warmer sound than the BTR5, and this sounds in comparison a little bit lean. If you've got the Zen DAC V1, I'm not sure that it's worth upgrading to the V2. Apart from the beefier processor, the better jitter clock, the MQA decoding rather than rendering, I think they're very similar. Now, I would like to try the V1 just to see if it sounds a lot different. Now, the Zen DAC is one of the cheaper offerings from iFi, and as such, it's aimed squarely at the beginner audiophile, just setting out on their ultimately wallet-busting journey. And for those people, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's just superb. Now, if you get some well-matched headphones in the 200 to 400 price range, such as the Sundaras, for example, or even the Drop 6XXs, then you've got yourself an astonishingly good transportable hi-fi setup that you can even drive from your smartphone or from the iPad, as I've shown you. In fact, I think you'll need to spend a lot more before you see significant jumps in sonic quality. So I have no hesitation in awarding the Zen DAC V2 the much coveted Audio Fixation Gold Award. I will have to send this one back in another few weeks, and I'll be gutted. I might even consider buying it, to be honest with you, because I've enjoyed it that much. But as ever, those are just my thoughts. I'd love to hear your comments below. Do come and hop on the Discord and we can continue the chat there. And watch out for the next video.